tonight. Ms. Herbert, do we have any apologies?
Yes, we do, Chair. We have an apology from Councillor Dutta.
Okay, thank you. We have a quorum, but we would need to co-opt somebody else. Lord Mayor, are you wanting to be co-opted, or we've got three vacancies at the minute? So, oh well, we can co-opt Lord Mayor, Alderman Sexton and Councillor Sherlock.
Happy to move that we co-opt the Lord Mayor and Alderman Sexton. Haven't we? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't. I've got to pop out in a minute,
yep.
so I don't think I can.
All right. We have.
Thanks.
Okay, so we have Alderman Barakis who's arrived as well. Welcome, Alderman Barakis.
Well, we can have things.
Okay, so we have Alderman Sexton and Councillor Sherlock. Thank you. Is there any dissent to those being co-opted? No. Okay, so moved. All right, so we can we have an item to move deputation, that we hear deputations, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Any dissent? There's no dissent, so we'll move into the deputations. Welcome, gentlemen. You have 5 minutes to address the committee. So if you could make your points, and your time starts now. So if you take yourself off mute, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. We do apologise, firstly, for the video link last week. So we do apologise for that. The job at hand is 354 Macquarie Street, as everybody is familiar. I represent Mr. Stevenson and as his architect, and we initially lodged the planning application some 12 months ago. We had been coordinating with Richard Bacon and also Nick Booth with regard to the heritage status, which was a concern initially. Our design for a modest extension on the small heritage cottage, which dates back to the 1840s, and subsequently had another addition placed in the rear section of the property in the 1950s of a small skillion and bathroom addition. There's really limited rear backyard. As you've possibly all seen from the documentation, there's only 232 square metres of site area, should I say. The initial heritage cottage is only 52 square metres with a front veranda, with the rear kitchen area some 25.2 square metres. Our proposal initially was to look at a second story addition with a skillion type roof addition to the small cottage. Initially Nick had some concerns from the heritage perspective with regards to the scale, I guess, of the existing fabric of the cottage. So we came back to the table and actually redesigned away from a typical type skillion pop-up to go to a more modern looking facade into the rear section of the upper area of the existing kitchen and bathroom zone, which retains the fabric of the existing roofline and the cottage in the foreground, and have a glass facade on the upper addition, which is, as I mentioned, set back from the main fabric of the existing cottage. And also we've offset the building off from the northern side, which is predominantly the connected side that is in full view from the front, from the streetscape. Therefore, offsetting the glass facade, we felt that this compromised any issues with, problematic issues with heritage, and gave us a modern reflection on still retaining the new fabric of the existing cottage in the foreground. And Nick actually quoted, he did come back to us back on the 29th of the 5th, and mentioned that only by setting the building extension back and allowing the original building to breathe can you successfully make larger additions to smaller, older properties. And we felt that with this approach, we certainly have achieved that in this instance. Furthermore, Councillor, we believe that with the addition at the rear and the view from the streetscape, there is very minimal impact looking back at the cottage, given the fact the elevation of the cottage is some 1,200 millimetres above the street itself. The car parking is essential to the north, where it takes the pressure off the street with dual car parking spaces to the north. So we're very limited as to where we could have placed the actual addition. With the rear backyard being so small and only some 4.5 metres from the rear wall back to the rear boundary, left us with you know, a very minimal area to be able to contain our additions. And we felt it very important that Bob being able to house some more of his family members, this was a reasonable opportunity and certainly a nice transition from a modern to a heritage listed building. And do you like to say anything, Bob? No.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Hills. Do you want to say something, Mr. Stevenson?
No, I think Graham's just about covers a lot.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Committee and elected members, do you have any questions?
Chairman, Peter, I do. I should have put my
You're right.
hand up.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm just looking at the east elevation now, page 28 of 51 on my computer. And is the problem the fact that the new addition isn't set back from the cottage using a sort of little entryway like we seem to require these days, so that there's a definite separation between the old and the new? Is that the issue through you to Mr. Noy, perhaps, Chairman?
We might hold that for the moment, Alderman Sexton. We'll just see if there are any other
questions of Mr. Hills. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. So any
well,
questions?
Perhaps I can rephrase the question. Was that issue put to the architect? Because I can see that there's a doorway right at the very back, which looks to me as though the whole of the upper story could have been moved back over that doorway, which would have potentially allowed that walkway or separation between the old and the new. And I'm wondering whether that was considered in the design.
The reason for that was to actually provide an entry access into the current attic roof area for storage, whereas that link between the new and the old is basically hidden, behind the actual ridge line. So that's not seen at all. And it's just really a purely placed there to create that link, as I say, between the fabric of the new section through into the rear of the roof line.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Hills, was there nothing that you felt that you could do to try and mitigate the exposure or the view from the street in relation to this extension?
Councillor, I guess short of going to an extension at ground level there and then taking away the rear courtyard, it's a very difficult site. It's a very limited site. And really there'd be such limited outside space as well. And given the fact that the actual building is dwarfed between two very large structures either side, we're also losing a lot of sunlight in its immediate form. And so we felt that the best compromise was to actually lift up above that kitchen and bathroom zone to enable that facade to take up a fair bit of sunlight during the course of the day at least.
Thank you. Thanks for that answer. Okay, if there are no further questions, thank you for your presentation and answers. I'll now open the item for discussion. Councillor Coates, I've actually we've already co-opted Alderman Sexton and Councillor Sherlock before you arrived, but so I'll ask that somebody move the item or start the discussion at least.
I'll move the item as recommended by the officers to get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Any discussion?
Sorry.
Alderman Sexton, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Go back to my question earlier, through you, perhaps to Mr. Noy or the appropriate officer. Is the issue, as I've already suggested, the fact that there's not a little separation? I know that there's a tendency to require a distinct separation between the old and the new with these types of developments. Is it just that, or is it also the second story?
Look, I might refer that question to Mr. Booth. Who's
Thank
not
you,
in.
Ms. Booth.
Through you, Chair. Primarily, it is the fact that it is the second story rather than the degree of separation between the two. Generally speaking, it is, as the applicant has pointed out, it is a very difficult site. There is only limitations as to how much you can actually extend the property, but the advice has always been that due to the smallness of the cottage and just how visible any second story would be, that they should approach it from trying to achieve as best they could from a single story. Whilst that would require the loss of the back garden, potentially as it is at the moment, we do draw the applicant's attention that the driveway, I think, can actually accommodate 3 vehicles, and that they could potentially have co-opted some of the driveway as a potential sort of courtyard to provide some outdoor space. But yeah, in answer directly to the question, it is primarily the design and the 2-story aspect of the proposal.
Thanks, Mr. Booth. Any further questions for Mr. Booth? Alderman Briscoe.
Yes, well, it may be Mr. Booth. Thank you, Chair. I suppose the cottage has been compromised when I visited a couple of weeks ago. The windows are not original at the front. There is 2, well, it could be a 3-story concrete block. I won't describe the aesthetics of that one on one side, and a very nice brick double-story, or a bit more than double-story building on the other side. So can you see that that if you are doing an extension, that it wouldn't be noticed compared with the 2 neighbours? Perhaps Mr. Booth may answer that one.
For you, Chair, I suppose the issue is not just the fact that it's individually heritage listed, but it is within a heritage precinct as well. Photographs provided in my report do show that the building is visible, although it is obscured partially by some of the buildings on either side. It is clearly visible, and I'm guided by the fact that the heritage precinct, as part of its characteristics, speak of the fact that the streetscape is largely intact. Of course, the buildings, certainly one building to the left of the site is a slightly more modern building, but it does form part of the streetscape, which was considered to be of heritage worth. And it does talk about the intactness of the streetscape, and it talks about the quality and the variety of the built forms. So that's the suggestion is really that here what we're talking about is that the cottage is of a high quality. It certainly presents itself as a largely unaltered Georgian cottage. And whilst there have been alterations, most notably to the rear, those are clearly not visible from the streetscape. Whilst of course this extension would be highly visible and would therefore clearly have an impact upon how you would perceive the Georgian cottage.
Thank you, Mr. Booth. If I make some comment, I don't know how that monstrosity of a concrete block, a building beside to the left, adds to the streetscape, except in a negative way. there is a fairly big front garden for this cottage. And so, in my view, the extension suggested by the applicant does, in my view, aesthetically fit in with that, considering that your eye will be, it will go towards the two tall buildings on both sides. So the sacrifice of a backyard, I don't think is worth it in this case. So I will foreshadow a motion for approval, subject to conditions if the motion that's before us fails.
Okay, thanks, Alderman Briscoe. Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Booth. Just in regards to the issue of visibility, my understanding was, just going off the performance criteria, that when we're talking about it not being allowed to unreasonably dominate or detract from the area, I wasn't sure that just the fact that it's visible in itself was a justification for refusal. I would have thought that whether or not it unreasonably dominates or detracts from either the place or the specific property itself would be the issue. But just going on the issue of the visibility, where in your report where you've got, the precinct is significant for reasons including, you do say that the streetscape's largely intact, but it also has number 2, that the quality, variety of built forms form a range of periods that make up the homogeneous streetscape. And I think that is reflected in the fact that there are quite a varying different size, different shaped buildings in the area. Just the 2 on either side, I think, are quite a bit larger. So I'm just curious as to where the reasoning has come from, that just the fact that it's visible, even if it's not that visible, is a sticking point here.
Well, of course, it's not just a question. Sorry, through you, Chair. It's not just a question as to whether it's visible. It's whether it's still sympathetic and not to the detriment and the character of the cultural heritage of both the precinct. And of course, at the same time, it must be sympathetic, subservient, and complementary to the dominant characteristics of the cottage. So my viewpoint is that it is not subservient or sympathetic or indeed complementary to these characteristics of the cottage. So in terms of it failing the tests of the heritage listed building, it would appear to be contrary to E13 7.2 P1, P2 and P3. With regards to the heritage precinct, yes, it would be visible, and in my view, it would be to the detriment of the character and the historic heritage of the precinct. So if, for example, it was an extension that could be considered to be in keeping with the character of the area, then regardless of whether it was visible or not, it could be argued that it would comply with the requirements of the heritage precinct. However, in this case, it's both visible and would be of a character that wouldn't be in compliance with the heritage precinct.
So just to follow up on that then, because I'm just responding to the words that we used in your previous answer, and the topic of the issue of it being visible did come up. So you are saying that there is the issue, just the pure fact that it is visible doesn't imply that it detracts or unreasonably dominates the heritage building in question. It's visible. You're suggesting that it's visible to the point where it's where it is dominating. Is that what's being suggested?
For you, Chair, it's a combination of both. It's highly visible. It's a 2-story structure against a single-story structure, but more importantly, perhaps, it's of a design and appearance that wouldn't be in compliance with the heritage characteristics of the area.
Right. Okay. Look, that's I'm happy with that for the moment.
Thank you. Further discussion? Alderman Briscoe, is there something that else you wanted to say? Okay. Look, I think this is a really difficult application from my perspective. It is an extension of a house, but the house happens to be in a heritage precinct and have specific heritage requirements, and I understand that there's a small amount of area to build as a single story, but it's unfortunate that it's come to us with and I can understand Mr. Hill's design perspective, but come to the committee as a fully fledged second story, which is really quite visible from the road. So I think that there is this tension between what we have, but we have clear advice from a heritage perspective. If there is no further questions or comments, I'll put Alderman Briscoe, you have something else to say?
Yeah, just to confirm, there was no representations from anyone, including the South Hobart Community Association. Is that correct? No, there were no.
There were no representations. No, we're considering this without representations. Thank you. Okay, so I'll put the motion for refusal. Alderman Briscoe, how do you vote?
Against.
Who's next? Councillor Harvey?
For.
Alderman Baracus?
Against.
Alderman Sexton?
Against.
Councillor Sherlock?
Against.
And I vote for. So that's carried, I think, Belinda, four votes to 2. Oh, like, sorry, it's lost 4 votes to 2.
Correct, Chair.
Yep. Okay. So, Alderman Briscoe, would you like to set out your motion for approval, please?
The Director has got some conditions for approval. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And I think Craig has a copy.
Yes. Thanks for that. So I'll move that motion for approval. And noting that, as I said before, when we have to use our common sense here, this is a small cottage, residential cottage, nestled in between 2 very big buildings. The front is quite a big front yard, so it reads as a colonial building. The building on one side is probably early 1900s, and the building on the other side looks like a 1950s attempt at concrete block. So to me, I don't think you'll notice, especially when it's up. So when you're walking along that footpath, you're looking up to the building. If you do see the extension, it will be not as a plain elevation like we see in our plans. So I think it won't be obtrusive. You'll notice the 2 buildings on either side before you notice any small extension. So I move that motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Briscoe. Alderman Baracus?
Thank you, Chair. I think just going off what Alderman Briscoe said, I think it's important to note 2 things. I think the fact that as has been said, the streetscape in South Hobart, as was identified in the report, does have a variety of different build forms on the street. There's taller buildings, there's shorter buildings, there's buildings with large setbacks such as this one. And then also I think the fact that we can't look at the building just on the plans in isolation. I think we also need to remember that we're looking, if you're standing on the street, even if you're right in front of it across the road, you're looking up the hill at this building, which means anything that's behind it, even if it's higher, is going to be less visible by the nature of where it sits. And just as to the idea that some of the suggestions about making it a larger single-story extension, I'm worried that we'd have a situation where, such as what we saw in recent times, where we'd have a recommendation for refusal for the destruction of a heritage garden. I think we just need to be, appreciate the fact that this is something that I think, once again, is in fitting with the area by virtue of the fact that there is a variety of shapes and sizes. But then also remember that, once again, just much like Battery Point and many other communities, the South Hobart community is quite outspoken when it comes to development in their area, and good on them for being so. But there hasn't been a single representation from anybody, including the South Hobart Progress Association, or including many people that we do get that are quite outspoken on issues of planning. And there's been nothing, which is much like many of the sort of heritage-based applications that we've seen in recent times, where there hasn't been a single member of the community that's against this. The only reasons for approval, I think, once again, are those more subjective parts of the Heritage Code where we're talking about different interpretations of whether or not something's in keeping with the area or with the zone. And what it ultimately comes down to is what we think somebody should be able to do on their own property. So
okay, thanks, Alderman Marakis. We've got a couple of other people on the speaking list, so I might go to them. Councillor Sherlock.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I suppose I just got two issues that I wanted to mention, which is number one, as was pointed out, that the the application has to be sympathetic, subservient to the characteristics of the cottage. And look, I'd fully appreciate that argument if the cottage was not owned by so I think we have to consider that as well. And number two, with regards to the precinct, just because of its the heritage precinct, just because of its visibility, and it might be detrimental to the character of the streetscape, as has also been mentioned, the two buildings either side and variety of those two different buildings either side, I personally don't think that this would be detrimental. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Sherlock, you cut out when you were talking about the ownership of the property. Could you just explain what you were talking about there?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was just saying I'd understand it was said that the extension or the application would have to be sympathetic and subservient to the characteristics of the cottage. And so I understand that argument to the cottage itself, but the applicant also the cottage, is that correct?
Sorry, we lost you again. What did you say?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I'm having trouble with my internet. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I was just basically saying that we'd have to be sympathetic and subservient to the characteristics of the cottage. To my understanding, the cottage is also owned by the applicant. And so, no.
I don't know if that's relevant, really. But
you can't hear me?
Okay. All right. Councillor Harvey.
Through you, Chair. Question to Mr. Booth on the significance of this particular area in the heritage context of Hobart. We've always talked about Macquarie Street being one of the most intact colonial streets in the country. Could you just confirm that why this area is a heritage precinct?
For you, Chair, part of the reason why it's a heritage precinct is that this was actually one of the main roads in and out of Hobart. It's always been widely associated with both transport in and out of the city, but also the retail elements that have occurred there. A lot of the early development occurred along this stretch of the road. As has been pointed out, this cottage actually appears in the Sprent survey of 1840, so therefore it's one of the earlier buildings of Hobart. So yes, it's always been one of the principal routes in and out of Hobart.
And from a national perspective, how significant is Macquarie Street?
From a national perspective, for you, Chair, I would say that it is one of the earlier streets of Australia that's still in use. I would consider it to be highly significant nationally, just as a route of this type is. It demonstrates the early development of the city, the routes that were used. Other routes became more fashionable as they began to improve drainage around there, but it's still one of the earliest and most significant routes in and out of one of the capital cities.
Okay, so therefore, justifiably, there are strong grounds on heritage that we should do the best we can to protect both that, or to maintain both that house and the streetscape in the area. So I think that confirms why I moved the recommendation for refusal, and I'll be voting against the recommendation for approval now, because this is one of Australia's most important heritage areas.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey. So we have a motion for approval. Everybody's had a chance to have a look at those, the reasons for approval that Alderman Briscoe has put. I'll put the motion. Alderman Briscoe, how do you vote?
For the motion for approval.
Thank you. Alderman Sexton?
For.
Alderman Barakis?
For.
Councillor Sherlock?
For.
Have I asked you, Councillor Harvey? Sorry, I'm going out
Against.
of order. And I'll vote against as well. So, Belinda, that's carried 4 votes to 2?
That is correct, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr Hills and Mr Robertson, that will go, you can stay around for the council meeting if you like. It will go to council and it's recommended for approval to full council. Thank you. And I now close this meeting and see you in the council meeting. Thank you.